Welcome to the Suffer Sooner podcast. Follow along with three average people doing some above average things. We have jobs, families, and we enjoy pushing ourselves to be the best that we can be in gravel, triathlon, and endurance sports. We've made mistakes, conquered what was once impossible to us, and pushed through barriers to come out the other side stronger, smarter, and more willing to find the truth in the dark places that only suffering can take you. Sometimes in life you have to be willing to push yourself in an attempt to get it over faster, and thus you may just have to suffer sooner. What's going on? This week, we're talking about finding the right horse for the course, picking the right bike for the distance. The idea is that you wouldn't ride a TT bike through 200 miles of gravel, and you probably wouldn't ride a gravel bike through the Queen K in Hawaii for an Ironman. So, Serena, how's it going?
Lousy. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it sounding a little under the weather.
I don't feel very good, and it causes last week's panic, which was supposed to be on the downward trajectory to kind of shoot back up. I haven't been able to work out yesterday or today. My kids have given me some lovely virus that gives me a sore throat and a headache and makes me very tired. So I'm trying to be patient with myself, but at the same time feeling a little panicked that I've missed some days, but we'll see what happens. I'm at least sitting at my desk today, which is an improvement from yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the same boat. I got kids that go to school and, they bring home everything. So, sometimes it's hard because you're like, well, I don't want to be a monster and just like spray them in the face with Lysol and send them to their room without any dinner. But, you also have to be like, well, if you're feeling lousy, like don't come and hang off of me, guys,
Well, and that's what's really tricky for me is that my 6-year-old must just have the world's highest pain tolerance, because I noticed the other day he had kind of a scratchy throat, but hadn't complained about anything else for all week. And then when I got sick, he said, "Oh yes, Mom, my neck has been hurting, the inside of my neck."
Oh man.
You mean you had a sore throat? He's like, "Yeah, for a lot of days." I said, "You never thought to say anything?" He said, "Nah, it's good." I said, "It is not good."
It's not
but I've just
good.
never heard a sore throat described as a sore neck. So I learned something from my children every single day, who apparently can deal with a virus far better than I can.
Oh, I know, right? So, well, we were talking last week about getting ready for Unbound Gravel, and so we started discussing whether or not the bike that you're currently riding is going to cover the distance. I know we've used it in like 100K gravel ride, and we've used it in the 100-mile gravel race, but like you've always said that it just feels a little off, right?
Yeah. So I have always struggled with bike fit, regardless of whether I'm riding my time trial bike, whether I'm riding my road bike, whether I'm riding my gravel bike. I don't know if it's partially because I don't have the typical biker's body. I'm not tall and lean and thin. So I think that that's part of it. But the other thing is, I'm just not sure I'm riding the right frame. I often get off a gravel bike ride and my hands are very sore. They've fallen asleep. My shoulders are kind of achy and my back hurts. And I've always somewhat attributed that to a lack of fitness, or maybe I just went a little hard that day. But we rode this past week and didn't ride terribly far, but I was pretty sore and uncomfortable when I got off. And I was just thinking to myself, I do not want to multiply this by a factor of 1.5. I will be miserable. And I don't know that I can finish riding 200 miles in this situation, which got me thinking about, am I on the right bike? Which is started a whole cascade of events that is incredibly stressful to what is the right bike for me for Unbound.
Yeah. So basically, we have been pouring over all sorts of options for Serena, and so we've been looking at. She rode Danny's bike, which I dub it the little kid's bike because it's about a size 52. But I'm also a 6'1" and I ride a 61 centimeter frame, basically, or 60 centimeter gravel frame, an extra large gravel frame, which is probably just a little bit too big for me, but still, comparing my bike to their bike, it looks like, uh, a a big kid's bike and then like a little kid's bike. So we we were goofing around in the parking lot, and Serena was telling us about our her hands. And basically, I've done bike fits for, I don't know, like 5 years or so for this place I used to work at. And I've done Serena's bike fit before. I've done Danny's bike fit. I've done, I don't know, probably over like 200 or so bike fits. I have bike fit a lot of people in the northern Kansas City area. So then my thing is always that you should never my rule is always that nothing should ever feel numb or go numb, and there should never be any pain that increases. And I think, talking to Serena when she was saying, "Oh yeah, my hands are numb," I started looking really a lot closer at her gravel bike setup, and so that was basically the beginning of the search for trying to figure out what we can do for Serena to get her bike to fit her properly. So one of the first things that we were talking about was changing her stem and bringing the bars closer, right? Because everything started to feel kind of out of reach. And so that was one of the first things. And then we decided, you know what? Why don't we have Serena ride Danny's bike? And then Danny was gracious enough to let Serena ride his bike, and from the second she jumped onto it, she was like, "Oh wow, this is a lot different." So, that
Well,
was
and I think it should be noted that Danny and I are of similar heights.
yeah, you guys are only like like maybe an inch or so off for sure. So, yeah. And so like that's the thing, right? Like you don't know that your bike is, humans are really great at adapting. And so you don't know that you're kind of riding something that's maybe not working until you put it to these extremes. Like until you ride it or you come back. The best time really to know that you're riding on the wrong size bike is when you come back off of not riding it for 6 months. Because then when you get back on it, you're like, ooh, man, this feels weird. So I think that's what we were having going on when on our gravel ride, right?
Well, and I have a hard time balancing that with, does this feel weird because this bike doesn't fit? Or does this feel weird because my body has not ridden a bike for 2+ hours in 6 months either?
Yeah,
So
right?
I think that that's a struggle. And let's be real honest here. I spent a lot of money on that bike several years ago, and I'm not super eager to pony up for another one. But at the same time, I also know that I probably cannot ride that bike as is for 200 miles. I mean, I've ridden it, I rode it for Unbound 100 last year and made it through okay, but my feet started to kind of go numb a little bit, and my hands always have had that issue. So I was really what I was originally talking to Travis about is what kind of modifications can we make to my cockpit that will give me some other options, other places to put my hands so that I'm not just stuck up there on the hoods. And we had talked about aero bars, and there's a different handlebar setup that I might like, and whether I want to put some different things on the handlebars just to make it more comfortable, which is just, it feels very overwhelming to someone who has always just said, sell me the right bike and I'll ride it.
Right, exactly. Because sometimes that right bike may not be something that even some of the local places stock. Um, and that's the trouble, right? And that's the thing is trying to find what is the right bike for you and for the distance. So like when you were doing the 100, it's like, "Oh, okay, I can kind of suffer through this," right? When I first started riding gravel, I had the Specialized Crux, which is a full-on cyclocross bike. And I rode that basically for my first, 25-mile gravel ride, my first 50-mile gravel ride, and then I did like a 60 or an 80-mile gravel ride. And when I did that 60 and 80-mile gravel ride, I was hobbled. My back was completely locked up. My body just could not take it. The bike fit me okay, and it fit like my road bike, but there was something about the geometry or the way I was on the bars that was too aggressive that my lower back could not handle it, and I ended up going, well, if I'm going to do these longer distances, I had to get a bike that I could sit more upright with my lower back. And so then I got to this dark matter from Argon 18, which is the bike that I'm currently riding now. So
Well, and Travis, let's talk a little bit about that. For someone lay to the sport or new like me, what is the difference between cyclocross and gravel? As I went back and looked at how my bike was advertised in the beginning, it is advertised as a cyclocross bike or a racing gravel bike, which I have since learned is very different than more of an endurance geometry or a touring geometry, which I'm going to tend to lean towards, especially on these longer distances.
right, exactly. And so cyclocross, think of going low speeds and being able to turn your bike so it has to feel nimble, but it also has to be uh basically like you have to feel kind of balanced over it so that you can make it through these 90-degree turns. It also has to be um you know very rigid because you're sprinting in and out of corners. So a lot of times when people are riding these cyclocross bikes on these gravel roads, they're like, "Oh my gosh, the chatter from the road is destroying me." And that was one of the things that you were talking about before with your hands hurting and and that could be some of the lower back issues too. My lower back issues was a positional thing, not more of a chatter thing. But that bike that I did ride, the Crux that I was riding, was very aggressive, and it uh, it it did leave me beat up for sure after 60 miles or so, a couple of these gravel races. And so that's what you're thinking of is these faster gravel bikes. You're paying for the speed, right? For the more aggressive position so that you're more aerodynamic. You're a little bit more weight over the front tire so that you can control the bike a little bit better. And then you can and these the shorter wheelbase and shorter chain stays make everything feel the road chatter feel a lot harsher, and so that you're getting a lot of feedback from the road. And 200 miles of that, not saying that it can't be done, but 200 miles of that is going to be a lot for anybody. Um, but if you're looking for the more relaxed geometry, that's why I went to more of a like more relaxed gravel bike that was not technically a cyclocross bike that was trying to fill the niche of gravel. And that's what you tend to find is that some of these bike brands are feeling the niche of gravel by just selling people their cyclocross bikes, which work in the beginning for sure. If you're only looking to ride, you know, 30, 40, 50-mile gravel rides and that's about it, you're not going to push yourself to the longer distances, a cyclocross bike is perfect. Like it's cheap, it's inexpensive, they're readily available, they're all they make them out of aluminum. They're really great bikes, and they're like a do it all kind of bike. But like if you want these longer endurance type gravel rides, that's where you're starting to get into like the salsa cuddy. You're starting to get into, the dark matters. You're getting into specialized diverge. You're getting into the Trek Topstone. There's like all of these specially made endurance gravel bikes.
Yeah,
So
and again, I only knew what I knew, right? And I don't know that when I bought that bike several years ago, I was ever going to attempt the 200. So I think that also sometimes you just have to give yourself a little bit of grace in that your goals have evolved a little bit. And everybody gives me a hard time, but I'm forever trading in my bikes. I have had a couple road bikes. I've had a couple TT bikes. I'm probably going to have a new gravel bike soon. And it's just been kind of the evolution of what my goals are and where I'm trying to take that particular bike. And I guess I'm pretty thankful that there are lots of bike shops around where we live. They're pretty great about doing trade-ins, which has also been good for me, and that I'm not stuck with this bike that no longer suits my needs. So, but it is kind of stressful, especially not having the same pool of knowledge that a lot of the bike fitters have, in that, can this issue that I'm complaining about be remedied with a different stem, with a different grip, with a, a, a riser or something like that? Or is it a bike fit question that can only be remedied with a new bike? And that is also really difficult to, I think, sometimes plow through when you're not an expert bike fitter.
Right, exactly. And that's the first thing that we're going to try to do is we're going to try to modify your current bike to see if we can get it the most comfortable for you. And that's the whole goal, right? Is you're always I always like to say to people that, I'm always in search of that perfect comfort, like whatever it is, and it changes from day to day. But you're like, oh, maybe I need to lower my saddle a little bit. Like, I'm always tinkering to find that next, like, the little bit of fit that feels a little bit comfortable. I even swapped out my stems today because the last time I rode the gravel bike, I was like, my fingers and hands were going a little numb, and I was trying to get into a more aggressive position. But unfortunately, the stem that I put on was not gonna do it. So, it's always we're, even bike fitters and riders are always kind of messing around with our fits to try to find like that. If I can just get a little bit lower and be able to push out the same amount of power and be this arrow, and it's just it's always this thing that we're always trying to chase, is that perfect optimal fit. But I think if the first thing that we're going to do to Serena's bike is go ahead and try to make it as comfortable as we possibly can. And when we get there, then we take measurements and then we start looking at would a new bike be a better option for her, or is it the same? Is it going to be the same situation all over again? Because if it's the same situation all over again, then she doesn't need to buy a new bike. She just needs to, change the stem length and add some more height on her stack, or, move the seat forward type thing. So that's the first thing. And that's what you want to do when you work with a bike fitter is you definitely want to, if you're lucky and you have a retool bike fitter around you, you can always go to there and they can always give you a list of bikes after you do a retool. And they give you a list of bikes that would fit you. If you do it like 99% of us, where we just, ooh, that's a nice bike. And I've been guilty of this, buying a bike because it looks really nice or it looks really cool. And then you're like, well, now I have to make it fit me. So that's my camp, even though, I am a bike fitter and I'm like, oh, that's the hardest thing to do. But so um, retool is a great option to go. But if you don't have that, always talk with bike fitters and people in the industry or your local bike shop. They always have a bunch of stems lying around that they've swapped out for people, or people bought different stuff. So you can always rent them from them or buy them from them for cheap and go from there. So
Well, and
always.
Travis, I feel like that's something I should have said when we were talking about things you can't live without either. I think that over time, I've also learned that the bike fit is something I can't live without. I can have the fastest bike on the planet, but if it doesn't fit me or I can't ride it the distance I want to ride it, it is of zero use to me. So I think when I talk to people who are just starting out, whether it be in triathlon or biking, my second piece of advice always to them is to go get a bike fit, because it will make all the difference in the world to you. And the best bike fitters I found too are the ones who don't just do a single meeting with you. They do the best they can in the fit on the first day, and then they send you out and have you ride it and continue giving them feedback until you feel like you have the best fit possible, which is something that was a long time coming for me to figure that out as well.
Yeah, I mean that's how I hold all my fits too. Is I usually go and fit somebody, and then if we make some changes, depending on how drastic they are, they may have to either see me again, or I'll check back in with them, in about 2 weeks of them riding, and then I usually keep in contact with them with that fit for about around 90 days, because especially if you're coming out of the winter and you haven't ridden your bike, everything's going to start to feel different as you start riding, especially if you're not, you haven't been doing this, for your whole life type thing. Like you're, you're going to, want to change stuff. And now is the time to change it anyways. And you start riding, and you find like, ooh, I used to think that my bars were too low, so I had them raise them up, and now I feel like they're too high, so let's move them back down. Like, that sort of stuff as you start to ride through the season, that's normal, and that's why I usually give about 90 days for everything to kinda suss its way out.
Well, I think that that is a perfect segue into our adventures this weekend, though.
Right.
Travis, Danny, and I generally ride on the weekends. We try to do our longer rides then, but there's a real draw, and we have so many lovely friends who sometimes say, "Hey, I want to come out and ride with you guys." And we try really, really hard to be so inclusive, and we would love to have a whole pack of people out there riding gravel. But this past weekend, I have a friend. His name is Aaron. Who? How tall do you think Aaron is, Travis? 6'4",
Y
maybe.
yeah, either 6'4" to 6'6". He's right in that range. He's taller than me, that's for sure.
And he's a really athletic guy. He's a trainer at one of the local gyms, and I met him in a beginner triathlon workshop where I used to just go and hang out because that's where my friends happened to be. I wasn't a beginner by any means, but he showed up one day. And he is one of the most amazing humans you'll ever meet. Uh, 2 years ago, I decided I wanted to do a century, and Travis was kind enough to map us out a course. And over the course of that 6 hour day, I think 7 different people showed up to ride at least a portion of it. But Aaron said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to just give this a whirl. I've never ridden more than 30 miles, but I'm going to go out and try to ride this century with you." And I am not kidding
Mhm.
you. That dude showed up with a road bike that he had borrowed, one water bottle, and one granola bar. And he not only did he finish it, he thrashed us the entire ride.
Yeah,
Um,
he did great. He
he's
rode
just
the
an
whole
amazing
thing.
human.
Yeah. It's so great when like, meet people who are truly athletic like that, that just, they're just like, "Oh, like, I've never really ridden this far, but let's give it a whirl," and they just start doing it, and it was a thing that was awesome to see. Yeah, so he went and rode 30 miles of gravel with us on a single speed,
Yes.
on this weekend. No, just 1
In
gear.
flats too, let's be
And
honest about that. I
yeah,
mean, we gotta give him all the credit.
yeah.
He didn't even have cycling shoes on, so he's only getting the benefit of the downstroke on this single speed.
Yeah, he was just riding the single speed with flats out to, the I'll have to look, but the course that we pick is not flat by
I
any
think it was
means.
2,500 feet of climbing, maybe? I can look.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up real quick. But yeah, it's rolling hills of Missouri, and we're going through, up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's a light breeze on the way out there. He did really, really, like, he was basically you know, just handing it all to us. And then because we had a little bit a of a tailwind. But then on the way back, it was, headwind, and he he didn't slack off, that's for sure. But there was a little less pep in the step, but he still, if he just the absolute, like, awesome human that he is. He just was out there just crushing it with us, riding basically right behind us, and just keeping up the whole time. And it was 2,234 feet of uh, elevation.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it
and I
was
think that that's
over
the thing
30 miles.
that's so amazing about a guy like that too is he was telling us that he's going to get a bike that actually fits him and with gears, and we're thinking to ourselves, we're gonna all need an e-bike to keep up with this dude if he can put out that sort of performance on a single speed that doesn't fit him. I mean,
Yeah.
there are some people who are just made out of different stuff.
It's great. I mean, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get a bike that's gonna fit me, and it's gonna have gears, and I'm gonna be able to put, my clip pedals in there, and just be able to ride." He's like, "I'll be able to ride with you guys then." I'm like, You may just ride, ahead of us, and we'll be lucky
Yeah.
if we ride with you." It's so great to just see people that are, or like, just like kind of talented in that, just be able to just come out. Like, I just love riding with all sorts of people. So it was just really great to, just ride with him, and just see him do what he can with the bike that he had, which is great. I mean, that's all it's about sometimes. Is just, we weren't riding really any technical gravel. There was a little bit of chunky stuff for about, maybe a mile, but other than that, it was just this kind of hero gravel that we all talk about here. But it was just rolling hills, and we were riding along, and yeah, he was keeping right up.
Well, and the other thing I always like when we ride with Aaron is he keeps it so simple. And sometimes I am really guilty of getting wrapped up in the data and worried about watts and heart rate and things. Aaron doesn't have a heart rate monitor on. He doesn't have a bike computer on. I'm not even sure he had a watch. He just rides and meters himself with perceived effort, which I think is truly amazing too and gives me some great perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and that's, there's a couple of people that we ride with that don't ride with computers or heart rate monitors or power meters. And that's, I'm always an advocate of just, if you have, people were getting good and fast at stuff before there was a power meter or a heart rate monitor, or the principles of training haven't really changed, in the last, I would say, maybe what, 50 years or so. They're still doing the Tabata intervals that they did that they discovered in the 1950s that worked. They're still doing, this 80/20 principle of training that they did, started doing back in the 80s, these long distance runners and the Kenyans and stuff. So it's not, and the Kenyans, heck, they don't even have, they have one, their coach has the watch. I watched this documentary about Kenyan runners, and it's basically the coach has the watch in the car, and then he basically drives the car the pace that they're supposed to run, and then they keep up, and then that's how they do their stuff. Like, none of these Kenyans have a watch, let alone, anything else. So it's amazing what people can do when you kind of get yourself out of all the numbers and just get to back to doing stuff, just by feel. And a lot of times when we, talk about, when we do bike fits and stuff like that, I always ask, clients, like, how does this feel? Does this feel better, worse? Does it feel the same? Did you notice what I did? Because sometimes there's some people that are heavily, like, able to adapt to a bike fit, and they can adapt within like 2 or 3 centimeters of difference. And then there's some people, that I've bike fit, and me particularly, if my bike is off by, I don't know, I would say maybe half a centimeter, I know. Like, I know when my seat post falls. I know when my cleats are shifting. Um, all that kind of stuff. Like, there's some people that just know, when things have changed, and it's not good or bad. It's just different people doing, the same thing and having a good time out there. So
Yeah, I think it's just a really hard balance sometimes to meet, but boy, there's nothing more humbling than when Aaron shows up. He also has red hair like Travis, so we jokingly tell him it's just the power of the ginger guy who shows up and crushes us all, but it's always so great
Yeah.
perspective for me.
Yeah, I love riding with Aaron. I love riding with anybody who rides with us. Comes out and rides with us. It's always great. So I'm always happy, especially when we get to see some of our friends because we're all training for different things. So it's really great.
Well,
So
I feel like I drove us somewhat off topic, Travis. So we've talked a little bit about gravel bikes and how to choose the one for you. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about as far as like geometry or TT bikes or fits, anything like that that's really too
so
quick and fancy?
So the next thing that I would say when we're talking about, when you decide what kind of bike that you want, like if you want a road bike, gravel bike, endurance gravel bike, all that there's 20 different bikes out there for 20 different things, and you don't have to have 20 different bikes. I'm really a big fan of, just trying to find something that works and then, modify. You can once you have a bike that fits, you can modify your position a little bit to make yourself a little bit more aggressive, a little less aggressive, that type of thing is how I go about doing stuff. Um so that's where we come into geometry charts and all that stuff. So the best thing that I've found is that you take what you're riding now and you compare it to other bikes on the market. So, like, let's say you have, um, let's say we have a bike. Let me see here. Let's put, we'll put a bike in let's see if I can actually do this. I will put
And while you're doing that, Travis, the other thing I'll say is I think that I've learned a whole bunch over the last couple of weeks about geometry as well. One of the things that I now really understand is in my mind, I want this gravel bike to fit like a recliner, whereas I want my TT bike to fit much more aggressively. So for me, learning what is stack height, what does that mean? What is that term? What is reach? Um, and then using those two pieces of geometry as well as a lot of the other things, stand over height, things like that, um, and but still framing it in the way of, does this look like I'm sitting in a recliner or not? Does this look like I'm kind of stretched out over the bike and as small of a position as possible? That's more probably more what I want for my TT bike. So just again, getting enough information to be dangerous has been helpful because then I can ask more educated questions.
Right, exactly. It's kind of goes back to that, like, how does this bike feel compared to a different bike? Or and that's another thing too is you should ride as many bikes as you can. Borrow some of your friends' bikes. See what's especially if you're just listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know what kind of gravel bike to get. Well, borrow somebody your friend's bike or borrow, um, you know, anybody if you're good friends in the bike shop, ask to borrow their bike for, just you're not going to take it off road or, do anything crazy with it. You're just going to go ride it around the parking lot a little bit and just see what the difference is. But you can see these. What's nice about Specialized is that it has this the geometry chart here that actually shows you what it's measuring. Because a lot of people are like, well, I don't understand what stack and reach are, or seat tube angle, or all that kind of stuff. And usually what I like to tell people is the stack and reach is probably one of the more important measurements in bike fitting, because basically it tells you where the headset starts and how far away it is from the bottom bracket. Another thing that I like to measure, especially on people's bikes, is you're measuring the seat height from straight from the bottom bracket so that you can get the same seat height um, across different bikes because the setback is always a little bit different. So if you think the this angle here from this seat post can change, and so like that's why you take it from a 90 degree and you find where that saddle height, because that'll be somewhat the same depending on where you are according to the bike. It's a neutral position that you can measure from, and then I always measure middle of the saddle to the hoods or the pads, and then that gives you an idea of how far that reach or overall reach is that I do in bike fitting and stuff. So it's just a good measurement to have with everybody, so that you can know what's going on. And then so this is basically a basic geometry chart. And then what you can do is you can use this to find out, well, if I were to pick this 54, and you're looking at like, oh, what's the difference? Oh, it's almost 7 or it's 16 millimeters difference, from here to here. Um, and its reach is 9 millimeters difference. So like, that could be the difference. If you're riding your bike and you're like, oh, I wish the handlebars were just a little bit back, like maybe almost a centimeter back, that could be the difference. But you can also change that um, your with your stem length and stuff like that too. But when you change the thing with changing stem length is that you change the characteristics and handling of the bike sometimes. So you have to treat that with a caveat that sometimes when you start to get into the really short stem lengths, the bike does tend to feel like a little bit less stable. And if you have a really long stem length, the bike feels like it's really hard to turn. It's like driving a tractor. So if you're, let's say you have a really long stem and you're trying to ride like uh, a pretty technical course that has a lot of turns or some single track or something like that, it's going to be really kind of hard to navigate that. And vice versa, if you're on a really straight road and you have a very short stem, it's going to be very annoying because you're going to be shifting around and turning, and every time you hit a bump, the front end's going to like want to turn and stuff like that. So but that's what a geometry chart does, and you can use that to help you determine what uh, what what next step for your bike should be.
The other
So
thing I think that's important that I learned the hard way in the last year or 2 is all of these measurements you should probably have written down somewhere. We had to tear apart my bike so that I could race in Oregon last fall. And Travis was really kind and came over and helped me take apart this bike in my living room and put it in a box so that when I got to this hotel room in Oregon, I could put it back together. And there must have been 20 pieces of tape or marks on this bike so that I knew how to put it back together when I got there. And I guess I just, up until that moment, didn't really have a great grasp on all the places you can adjust a bike, which is great to know now. And I can probably fix most things that happen to me on the road now too, having put together one and torn it apart.
yeah, TT bike is just, there's just so many moving parts, and it's really hard to understand, a lot of times which how one affects the other. And because you have you know where your pad position is, how far they're off the bars, their stack and rise, the poles that go in for shifting, like where do those go? And then you have the tilt on that. And it's a lot of stuff. So yeah, definitely writing all your stuff down helps for sure, because writing it down, marking it with a silver Sharpie, especially when you start to feel like everything is feeling really good, and you're starting to get that bike fit dialed, you definitely want to like mark everything and then take pictures of the marks so you know that like, oh, this silver mark on my handlebars lines up with, I don't this other silver mark, or it lines up with the split in the stem, the faceplate of the stem. Maybe that's where you lined it up, or maybe you mark, so you don't forget. Because I mean, you don't you're not always changing your position in the bike, but when it changes and then something feels weird, you're trying to figure out what's going on. It's really nice to go back through and have pictures of what happened, and how things are different now. And then definitely have your measurements written down somewhere for sure. So,
And I guess I should say too, I've had a retool fit before. It was a really fascinating experience for me. I love new technology and things like that. So to have them strap all those sensors on and be able to ride the bike and see in real time pedal stroke and some of those other things that they measure was truly fascinating. But the other nice thing about it is I can now take that printout of that retool fit other places with me, um, to help at least start in looking for a new bike. Though I will say that there's a pretty drastic difference between my retool fit for my TT bike and the fit that I prefer for a more endurance type riding.
yeah, exactly. And that comes to the other part too, is like if you're getting a retool fit for a TT bike, that retool fit is good for TT bikes. It's not going to transfer very well. It can transfer a little bit to your road bike and maybe give you in the ballpark of a gravel bike, but a lot of times when you're getting these retool fits, um, it's you can always ask to, if you have two bikes or whatever, you can always ask to uh, just get scanned on with your other bike too sometimes, and they'll do that at a little less than, paying full price, for that. Maybe they'll do it for half since they already have you in the machine. So it never hurts to ask, and some places are different. But I do fits a lot of times where the person will have me fit them on their TT bike, and then I'll also do a fit on the road bike. So it's two totally different fits that we go through. Um, and so that's one of the things uh, to keep in mind, is that you're fitting the bike to basically what you intend to use it for. And uh, like a person that does a TT bike fit, like I usually ask people whether or not they're doing short course triathlon or long course triathlon. So are they doing an Ironman, or are they doing their local sprint and Olympic tries? Because that's a different fit too. Just like, when you're riding gravel, if you're doing a 50-mile gravel ride versus a 100-mile gravel ride versus 100+ gravel ride, all those bike fits are going to change a little bit. And so, it's good to know your dimensions and what your what's going to be the most comfortable moving forward, and having that bike fitter know what your intended use are for, because then they can help decide which fit's going to help the best for that type thing. So, well, I have one thing to share, and this is basically, um, if you're watching this on YouTube, you get to see all my bikes, and you get to see the size charts on there. And what I thought was insanely cool and insanely kind of very just kind of hit me out of left field, because I haven't done this. I just been, I fit my bikes, the saddle height, and then, I try to, kind of go back and forth with what I know that feels right. And so by doing that, I have made all my bikes basically fit somewhat the same. My saddle to the hood's measurement, or the horns on my TT bike are all the exact same length, and my saddle height, barring the gallium, which has 175 cranks instead of the 172.5 that I have on my dark matter and my shiv. Um, those those saddle heights are basically exactly the same. The gallium's only different by 2.5 centimeters, which is the difference between a 175 and a 172.5 crankset. So it's kind of, I thought that was kind of interesting in the fact that these bikes all have different stack and reach. The reach is about the same for me. So basically, if the bike comes in with about a 40 centimeter reach, I'll be able to make it work. The stack height, of course, is the lowest being the Shiv, the next being my road bike, and then of course this being my dark matter, which is the highest. So I just thought that was kind of interesting and for people to see um, as bike fitting goes. There is some stuff that should basically transfer through you know bike to bike, and that's kind of you know how your bike fits you. You're There's going to be some things that are the same, and some things that are different. So alrighty. Well, Serena, what else do you have as far as
I don't. I
bikes?
mean, I'll keep you posted in the ongoing saga of what is the right bike for me. I think we may be having this conversation later on in the season as we try to make my TT bike more comfortable. I struggle
Right.
with that bike too, in that it is very fast. It has always done me very well in races, but it is miserable to ride for a long distance. So it'll be a really interesting experiment to see how comfortable we can make that bike as I try to take on the Ironman distance without giving up too much of the aerodynamic speed that is really the point of having that bike in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, going, from a aggressive TT bike, that you can, if you're using it for a sprint or an Olympic or even a half Ironman, you're looking at maybe topping out around 3 hours of ride time. So you can kind of force yourself into a position for 3 hours. But when you're talking the Ironman distance, that's 6 hours, maybe seven, depending on your speed and all that stuff and the conditions. So that thing's got to be comfortable for 7 hours or 6 hours, depending on how fast you're going to ride. Um, so yeah, that'll be something that we're working on in the future, and it's all basically this the same thing that I do is just we take measurements of your where your base is, and then we make adjustments. That feels more comfortable, and we measure those, and then you any bike fitter should always let you ride and then come back and ride and come back because you know it's very rarely do you do a bike fit and everything is completely solved in the first go. So always come back to and if you're talking to your bike fitter and maybe he makes everything a little bit better, that's totally fine. And you only need to see him once or twice. That's totally fine. I've dealt with people that I've had to see every week for 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, just to get their position dialed. So just remember you're not inconvenience them. That's what they want you to, bike fitters just want you to be comfortable on your bike. So then you ride more and then you tell your friends about how comfortable you are, and just you keep spreading the word and more people get on bikes, and that's the whole goal. So hopefully we'll report back next week on what Serena does. If we're able to fix her bike, or I assume we'll be able to get her bike a lot better than it is right now. And so we'll
Travis, I
go
think
from
maybe
there.
the solution is Vespa.
Vespa mode.
Yep.
Yes, we call
Not Vespa
her
mode, just a Vespa.
just the Vespa. Yeah, we call her e-bike Vespa mode because she when she comes and rides with us, a lot of times if me and Danny are doing hard workouts, it's not beholden for Serena to come out and just thrash herself. So she got herself an e-bike. Actually, it's her husband's e-bike, but he doesn't know that it's mostly hers. So, which I think is the funny part.
I love that bike. It makes me really
Yeah.
happy. Though it doesn't fit very well either. So
No,
on
but I
wheel.
mean, but again, it's a e-bike. It's not supposed to fit like fantastic. You're not riding it, well, we will get into what you've accomplished with that e-bike, which is pretty awesome at a later date. But um that e-bike though, we Serena rides it and it just cracks me up when I hear that motor whining and then uh it's the Vespa mode just going ween as we're doing intervals and stuff. So it's super great. I love it. It's so fun.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about. I'm all for people making accommodations to be able to do the things that they want with the people that they want to be able to do them. And I think that had you told me 5 years ago that I might be riding an e-bike, I would have laughed in your face and told you that I would never do such a thing because that's cheating. But now, having done it for a year, it has been one of the best training tools out there for me. And I would recommend it to anybody who wants to just be able to go out and do things with their friends and stay within themselves. So I guess I'll leave it with that.
Yeah. I think having their e-bike is a great thing. Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed our discussion on bike fitting and what bikes to choose and do all that kind of stuff. So if you have any questions, please reach out. I can spend hours and hours and hours talking about this stuff. This is what I do on my free time. I love bike fits and bike fitting and all the other fun stuff that's involved there. So if you want to hear more about that, we can definitely facilitate that. And well, I think our suffering is over for now.
Happy Thursday, everybody.
Yep. Have a good one. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you have ideas for topics, questions, or would like coaching, please email suffersooner@gmail.com. And remember, sometimes you just have to suffer sooner.